Could, should, and will the Rangers make a run at unrestricted free agent Mitch Marner? No, no, and no.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1314 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, I want to go ahead and kick off today's episode by talking a little bit about Mitch Marner. Obviously, the Leafs were eliminated in the second round by the Florida Panthers last night, to the surprise of probably just about no one at this point when you look at that team's recent track record and all the issues that they've had in the playoffs. But now Marner becomes an unrestricted free agent, and the hockey world basically waits with bated breath to see where he's going to end up next. And there's some Ranger fans that are hopeful that maybe the Blue Shirts will throw their name in the hat and maybe try to pursue Marner. I am not one of those people. I'll explain why in just a minute. We'll also get into something that I feel like the Rangers could have done last offseason. I haven't heard anybody suggest this, and I'm not saying it would have cured all the Rangers' issues that they had this past season, because they had a lot of issues, but it's something that, hindsight being what it is, I think it could have made some sense. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a little bit. And then also going to talk about the remaining teams in the Stanley Cup playoffs, talk about the former New York Rangers that are still chasing a Stanley Cup. There's a handful of those players left. At least one former New York Ranger, it sounds like, will win a Stanley Cup this upcoming season. Although I don't think Edmonton has any former Rangers, but I'll get into the roll call of that a little bit later. So maybe not. We'll see. But we begin with Mitch Marner and my stance that the Rangers need to look elsewhere. That they need to look to go down a different path than getting into the Mitch Marner sweepstakes. So again, for anybody that might have missed it, Leafs lost to the Panthers at home in Game 7 last night. Didn't just lose, but they lost 6-1, basically got run out of the entire building, and a game where the Panthers basically just dominated. The only exception to that, I would say, might be the second half of the first period. For everybody that watched this game, that's when the Leafs started to actually push back a little bit. Looked like it might actually be, a good competitive game. Scoreless after one, and then the Panthers just took it to them in the second period and never looked back. Just complete domination after, that portion of the game, the second half of the first period there. As far as Marner goes, look, I'll preface this entire thing by going through the good stuff that Mitch Marner brings, because obviously the dude has unbelievable talent. One of the most talented players in the NHL. You look at his career at this point, 657 games, 221 goals, 520 assists, a total of 741 points in the 657 games. And even looking at his playoff stats, for as much heat as this Leafs team faces, and as much as they become the butt of every joke, constantly losing in Game 7, choking away series leads, whatever it might be, Mitch Marner in the playoffs, 70 games, 13 goals, 50 assists for a total of 63 points in 70 playoff games, which on the surface doesn't sound so bad, but I'll elaborate on why it's not as good as those numbers make it out to be. And I'll elaborate right now on all my reasons that I have for not wanting Mitch Marner anywhere near the New York Rangers. There's a term that gets thrown around quite a bit, and it happens from a lot of different fan bases, and certainly the Ranger fan base as well. Teams get criticized, particularly in the playoffs, for playing a brand of hockey that a lot of hockey fans refer to as soft perimeter hockey. Now, on one hand, it's a little bit of a cliche. Anytime there's a team that doesn't get the job done, I feel like they get labeled this way, fairly or unfairly. But when you watch this Leafs team play in the postseason and you see what's gone on there, the last bunch of seasons, I mean, they lose in the first round every year. They've gotten out of the first round twice now in this era, but then they lose in the second round in both instances. And you watch them play, and Marner specifically, that's what they're doing. It's perimeter hockey. It's honestly soft perimeter hockey. I hate to break out the dread S word, but that's what it is. You watch these games, these all-important games in Toronto, Game 5, Game 7 of this series against the Panthers, where Toronto was not even competitive, and their superstar players are just nowhere to be found. They're not getting to the dirty parts of the rink. They're not engaged in puck battles. They're not driving to the net. They're not seemingly willing to take hits. And that's not all just Mitch Marner. It's the superstar players on that team and just the entire team in general, really. But obviously Marner, given the fact that he is this talented player and he is one of the better young players in the NHL, he's going to be under the magnifying glass, in situations like this. And you look at Marner and this Leafs team, they have come up small so many times. I think that's now 6 straight Game 7 losses for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And like I said, a lot of early exits in the playoffs. That's basically all they know is early exits. They never made it to the conference final. And, it just feels like a situation where the star players on the Leafs essentially shrink in these spots, in these big games, in these big moments. The bottom line, and I don't know if this is too harsh or what, but the Leafs basically have established a losing culture. Nothing about what happened in this game last night in Game 7 or Game 5 before that, also in Toronto, is the least bit surprising. And you talk about losing cultures. The Rangers, after having a winning culture just last season, did a complete 180 and had one of the losingest cultures in the NHL. You don't go from President's Trophy to missing the playoffs just because. Obviously, something was not right this past season. We've tried to figure it out, and there's a lot of different theories, and we've thrown out a bunch of reasons. There's some tangible reasons. There's some intangible reasons for sure, but it's the same deal with Toronto, only worse. I mean, for the Rangers, yeah, they haven't gotten the job done, and they haven't won a Stanley Cup in this era of Ranger hockey, or just about any era of Ranger hockey for that matter. But at least the Rangers have had some big-time playoff moments. They've had some signature moments. They've had a couple of deep runs. They've made it to the conference final 2 out of 3 seasons. And I think have largely been seen as a threat. By this point, nobody sees Toronto as a threat. There's that part of you that, I was excited for Game 7, just as a hockey fan, oh, here we go. Can Toronto finally do it? Can they take out the champs? Are the Panthers going to bully them? It was the latter. And again, it should come as a surprise to absolutely no one. But you need some Bulldogs in that Ranger locker room, and I just don't think Marner's that guy. Certainly from a physical standpoint and a mental standpoint as well. You need guys that are out there determined and hell-bent on winning and ready and willing to do the things that you have to do to be successful in the playoffs. And I just don't see Marner as that guy. Does anybody see Mitch Marner as that guy at this point? You never know. Things could turn around. Maybe Mitch Marner ends up winning a Stanley Cup at some point in his career. Crazier things have happened. But the way things have gone throughout his entire time in Toronto, there's not really a good reason to believe that that's going to happen, unless you think that the talent will just one day take over and will lift up, the Leafs or whatever team he ends up playing on to glory, to Stanley Cup glory. So those are a couple of reasons. Another very obvious reason here that I'll throw out there as far as why I wouldn't want Marner on the Rangers is quite simply the price. We're talking about somebody here who, if he leaves the Leafs, is going to get a 7-year deal. That's the maximum allowed when a free agent goes from one team to another. And he is going to get a contract that's going to be paying him 7 figures a season. That's what's going to happen. And I don't want that to be the Rangers. Now, on one hand, the Rangers might save themselves by being in the salary cap situation that they're in, because you can't even hope to make a run at Mitch Marner without making a couple of other moves. I think certainly Kreider would have to be traded. You'd have to figure out a way to open up some cap space. Susie, I think, would be a candidate to be moved as well. But you'd have a heck of a time, even then, trying to squeeze him in under the salary cap for the salary that he's going to command. So it's one thing for all of us to critique his playoff performance, but when you factor in the price tag that's going to come along with this guy who has done nothing but come up short in the playoffs year after year after year, season after season after season, he's going to get an enormous contract. And he benefits from the fact, and we've talked about this before too, but he benefits from the fact that it is a very thin free agent class this season. He is very clearly, for all the struggles that he had in the playoffs and all the struggles that the Leafs have had in the playoffs over the years, he's very clearly the top player available on the open market this offseason. So there's going to be a bidding war, and somebody's going to have to pay out their you-know-what to eventually sign this guy, and I just don't want that to be the Rangers. The other aspect of the price, I mentioned this just a second ago, but the Rangers don't have the cap space. I don't think a team that's this tight up against the cap should bend over backwards and ship this player and that player out of town and give them away for basically nothing to make room for Mitch Marner at this point. I know that here's something else I'll throw out there too, because I know some people are going to make this comparison. The Rangers and the Leafs and Marner and the Rangers. Somebody is inevitably going to make the joke, oh, Marner comes up short in the playoffs. Well, hey, he'll fit in great on the Rangers. And I get it, I get it. But consider this. Again, the Rangers have made a couple of deep runs, and the Rangers star players that have come under fire from this podcast and otherwise have had bigger moments in the playoffs have come up bigger for their team over the years than Mitch Marner has ever done for the Toronto Maple Leafs. You look at somebody like Artemi Panarin in the playoffs. A lot of people like to say, oh, he can't get it done in the playoffs. Well, Panarin, the last time the Rangers were in the playoffs, was one of the driving forces that got them as far as they did. Overtime winner against the Panthers, lighting up the score sheet just about every game until they obviously ended up playing the Panthers. He had an overtime winner against the Canes. I think I said Panthers a minute ago, but you get the idea. He's also got a Game 7 overtime winner against Pittsburgh to his credit. So he's done some things that have really helped the Rangers in a big way. How about Chris Kreider? He scored a lot of goals in his career in the Stanley Cup playoffs. He's come up big in a major way in a lot of postseason games for this team. The hat trick against the Canes certainly comes to mind as far as recent history is concerned. Even Mika Zibanejad, who we've all taken a pot shot at one time or another based on the way he played this past season. 2022 against the Penguins, he had 7 points in games 6 and 7 combined. And that's when the Rangers completed their 3-1 comeback. Has Mitch Marner ever done anything like any of those things that I just mentioned a second ago? I don't think he has. I mean, I don't memorize, the Leafs history the way that I try to do with the Rangers, but he's never had a moment like that ever. And you could argue of all those players I just mentioned, he might have the most natural ability, natural talent out of any of them, but he's just never gotten it done in that way. Then you got to watch Mitch Marner in Game 7 here, screaming at his teammates on the bench. And on one hand, you got to try something. And, Austin Matthews is nowhere to be found either. He's the guy that does wear the C, for anybody that might be wondering. But, he was yelling at them in a way that kind of felt more like, what is wrong with you, other than a let's go kind of way. The gall of Marner to pull that when he was playing the brand of hockey that he was playing as poorly as he was playing, is he going to do that with the Rangers? Is he going to, if they were to sign him, he gets on the Rangers and they're in the playoffs and he's no showing like he always does, he's going to be yelling at the guys on the Rangers? On one hand, I guess somebody's got to try to light a fire, but I didn't like that. I just didn't like the way that looked, especially when Marner was playing the way that he was playing. And after watching Marner in the playoffs this year, other years in the playoffs, considering how high his price tag is going to be this offseason, I have absolutely zero interest in the Rangers making a run at him. You guys know if you feel differently. You guys let me know if you feel differently, I should say. But that's kind of where I'm at with Marner. I have no interest in him whatsoever, especially when you consider how long that contract is going to be and how expensive it's going to be. In just a minute, we're going to shift our attention to a hypothetical move that the Rangers, I feel like, hindsight being 2020, they should have made last offseason. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It is the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always an amazing go-to. The satisfying crack of opening each shell, it is like snack meditation. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works just as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers, as always, for obviously sticking with this podcast through thick and thin, the offseason, the postseason, the preseason, whatever it might be. In our next episode, I think we're going to discuss this. A couple of you guys asked me about the idea of the Rangers trading for Ryan McDonagh. This was in an article not that long ago. I want to say it might have been Peter Baugh of The Athletic, and he wasn't reporting that this was a big rumor that was going on. He was kind of floating it as an interesting idea that he had and something that he felt would make the Rangers better, if it was indeed Baugh. I do remember seeing this in an article. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. We'll be talking free agents and the draft as well moving forward. But for right now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a move that the Rangers, I feel like they could have made last offseason that maybe would have kept things from spiraling, I should say, as out of control as they did this offseason. And let me just say right now, this is a case of hindsight being 2020. I was not suggesting this last offseason. I wasn't pounding my fist on the table and saying that this is what the Rangers should do. But my idea is what they really should have done last offseason is held on to Barclay Goodrow and traded Ryan Lindgren. Again, that is not something I would have said back in August, September, whatever it might have been. But I'll explain why in just a second here. Let me kind of take you guys through my reasoning, and you guys can let me know what you think about this as well. So, you think about all the issues the Rangers had this past season, and again, there were a boatload of them. We've listed them, we've called them out for it. You guys know what they were. But two of the biggest issues, I thought, lack of leadership, lack of accountability, right? And you think about how last offseason they waived Barclay Goodrow to get around his no trade list, his partial no trade list. They knew that the Sharks were going to claim him. That's exactly what they did. You think about how the Rangers were going to trade Jacob Trouba last offseason, right? And then they're like, oh, yeah, no, just kidding. Trouba can stay. And then they traded him anyway. All this chaos that happened, all these things basically broke the Ranger locker room. Nothing was the same this past season as it was the season prior. And I think a lot of it can be chalked up to Jacob Trouba and Barclay Goodrow no longer being there. Now, on one hand, if you're the Ranger players, you got to get over it. You got to move on. And these other guys that wear the A, and anybody else on the team for that matter, need to step up in some kind of a leadership role. And I'm not going to sit here and bash the Rangers for waiving Goodrow, certainly not for trading Jacob Trouba, because I do think you could honestly make the argument that you were talking about the weakest forward and the weakest defenseman on the team as far as just all-around play is concerned. But it's also true that the Rangers, by doing those two things, waiving Goodrow, then trading Trouba, those are your two top leaders on the team. I don't think that can even be debated at this point. Jacob Trouba was the captain. Despite his struggles on the ice, I still think he was the best choice to wear the C for this team, looking back at everything that happened. And Barclay Goodrow, I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious. He was an alternate captain, and I think the one that was probably the most vocal, the guy that would, hold you accountable if things weren't going well among all the other alternate captains. And so what you could have done this past offseason is you could have traded Ryan Lindgren and held on to Barclay Goodrow. Because, and again, let me say, hindsight 2020, I was not saying this at the time. I don't know how many Ranger fans were saying this at the time. But if you were to have done this, at least you can hang on to one of your top two leaders on the team. Maybe things would have been a little bit better for the Rangers if you had somebody that would step up in a leadership role, as Barclay Goodrow very likely would have. I mean, think about what the Rangers ended up doing. So they waived Goodrow, and obviously they end up trading Trouba. They do re-sign Ryan Lindgren, but it took forever, which tells me that there was probably at least a somewhat contentious negotiation period between Lindgren and his camp and the Rangers. And then when the Rangers finally did get the deal done with Ryan Lindgren, they went 1 year at $4.5 million. So the Rangers never really committed to Ryan Lindgren. Even during the offseason when this deal was signed, you could tell that the writing was on the wall. We discussed it on this podcast. My advice to anybody that was a Ryan Lindgren fan at the time, myself included, was if you like this guy, enjoy this upcoming season, because it feels very much like this is going to be his last season with the Rangers. And as it turned out, yes, it was. He didn't even make it through the entire season because the Rangers were so bad, they had to sell at the trade deadline and move on from Ryan Lindgren. But again, what you could have done here, because the cap hits being what they were, Ryan Lindgren ends up making $4.5 million. Barclay Goodrow was, I want to say, $3.64 million, right there in that vicinity. You could have very easily, if you're the Rangers, traded Ryan Lindgren, hell on a Barclay Goodrow. And like I said, at least if you do that, you've got somebody that's important for leadership in that locker room. This is somebody that is obviously a hard-nosed player. It's somebody that won a couple of Stanley Cups in Tampa. And yeah, I realize he wasn't the superstar of that team. I get it. But, Lightning fans and even the players themselves on that team really put over Barclay Goodrow. Yanni Gourde was on that team. There was one other guy that I think was on that line that, oh my God, it's going to drive me crazy. Blake Coleman. That was a line, and that line was very, very important to establish a little bit more of an identity, certainly some more physicality for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So he did certainly have a role on that Tampa Bay Lightning team. And look, I'm not going to sit here and act like Barclay Goodrow is this unbelievable superstar player, because he very clearly is not, other than maybe that Gretzky-like run that he had in the playoffs for the Rangers. Last time the Rangers were in the playoffs, that was unbelievable. And Goodrow, I mean, for the Sharks this year, it wasn't very good at all. I mean, you look at what happened there. 77 games for Goodrow with the Sharks, 5 goals, 3 assists. He was a minus 37. You heard that correctly. And I know it's the Sharks, and that has something to do with it. But all those things can be put aside if you're just looking at it from a leadership perspective. And even if you kept Barclay Goodrow through this past season, there is a chance you would still have to deal him this offseason or waive him or do whatever they did to otherwise, shed his cap hit. But still, I do wonder about that hypothetical there. And that's what it is. It's very much a hypothetical. Would the Rangers have been in a better spot last season if Barclay Goodrow was still around? Would they have kept the season from spiraling out of control? Jacob Trouba, there's no way they could hang on to him anymore. His play had deteriorated to the point where he was a liability pretty much every time out there. He struggled in the playoffs every time the Rangers were in the playoffs. $8 million per season. It just was too much. He just couldn't do it anymore. I know people, he's old school and the physicality and the big hits. Okay, fine. $8 million a season. It's not worth 4 or 5 big open ice hits per year. It's just not. Goodrow would have been a little bit more feasible, though, just because he was making less than half of what Trouba was. And so, again, from a leadership perspective, I just do wonder if, Barclay Goodrow could have potentially helped this team last year. But now that's all said and done with. Again, I just kind of want to get this off my chest because I hadn't heard anybody else talking about it. And now it's about finding new leaders for this team. Who's it going to be? Who's going to be the next captain? That's an ongoing debate on this podcast and among Ranger fans. It's about finding the new guys that are going to take the steering wheel because obviously Barclay Goodrow, Jacob Trouba, those guys are gone. Somebody has to step up in a big-time leadership role this upcoming season. Is it going to be JT Miller? Is it going to be Vincent Trocheck, Adam Fox, Will Cooley? Throw out some names because I want to know who it's going to be for this upcoming season because that's an area where the Rangers really need to improve. But just unfortunate that nobody stepped up in that role this past season. We're going to keep everything rolling in just a second. I want to shift our attention to the obviously ongoing Stanley Cup playoffs. There are only 4 teams remaining. Going to talk about what's going on there and, what might happen, who we're rooting for, and certainly we're going to do a roll call of all the Ranger players that are remaining and discuss, who we could root for to win a Stanley Cup among former New York Rangers because, like I said, there are at least a few remaining here. So we'll get to that in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. We've got a couple of former Rangers, like I mentioned, still chasing the Stanley Cup. And let me actually just say this, quick PSA before we really get into this here. You guys let me know, how much or how little do you want me to continue talking about the Stanley Cup playoffs? Because obviously the New York Rangers are not in it. We all understand why. We know they didn't get anywhere close to being the team this year that they were last year, and they've had to watch at home. And there's only 4 teams remaining. But you guys let me know because I keep watching the playoffs. The Stanley Cup playoffs to me are too good to miss. I know some of you guys feel the same way. I know some of you, basically just kind of tune out as soon as the Rangers are no longer in it. And that's all well and good. But you guys let me know how much or how little Stanley Cup playoff coverage would you like going forward. Today, I figure since there's a new round about to begin, the conference finals, we might as well just kind of go through everything, talk about where things stand, and of course, discuss the former Rangers still aiming for a Stanley Cup. I do certainly have to talk about the Winnipeg Jets. There was a lot going on there. And with them being eliminated, it did take out 3 former Rangers, Neil Pionk, Morgan Barron, and Vladislav Namestnikov. Now, none of those 3 guys obviously spent a whole lot of time with the Rangers, but they've all become players that are pretty good. I mean, Neil Pionk has become a really good defenseman. Namestnikov certainly has his role with the Jets, and so too does Barron. Barron plays in a bottom 6 role, but that is 3 Rangers that we lost. And also, obviously, this human interest story for sure, just a tragic story. No doubt about it, with Mark Scheifele. A lot of you guys know what I'm talking about, but the day of Game 6, or it might have been the night before, but, obviously not too long before the puck dropped, Mark Scheifele lost his father. His father passed away, and Scheifele ends up scoring in Game 6. He actually scored a goal in the game. That gave the Jets a 1-0 lead. Stars came back, tied it, ended up winning it in overtime, but obviously a very emotional situation there, and certainly my heart goes out to Mark Scheifele, all of his family, anybody that was impacted by this. And the courage and the guts to take the ice in a situation like that, given the circumstances, I don't think anybody will ever forget that. And the Jets, honestly, after they beat the Blues, they were kind of the team that I was pulling for going forward. Just kind of, it's weird to call the President's Trophy winner an underdog team, but it kind of felt like they were an underdog against the Stars. And obviously, you look at their history, there's not really a whole lot there to get excited about either version of the Jets. So I thought it would have been cool to see them go on a little bit more of a run and, fight their way deeper into the playoffs. And what a difference between the Jets and the Leafs. We were talking about the Leafs earlier. I feel like if you're a Winnipeg Jets fan, you're probably holding your head high right now. And you're probably proud of what this team did, that unbelievable comeback that they had in Game 7. against the Blues, the fight that they put up against Dallas, despite, obviously these really, really unfortunate circumstances, to put it very mildly, with Mark Scheifele losing his father, the way they're all hugging him after the game. I mean, it was some pretty heavy stuff. And, you just hope that everybody's okay. And that, if you're a Jets fan, I'm sure you're hoping that this just draws that team even closer together. They made it farther than I think anybody thought that they would at the start of the season. And just some dramatic stuff. And I'm just kind of bummed because I was certainly pulling for them once they got past the Blues. And now we're kind of at a spot where I don't really have any horse in this race. Like, you look at the 4 teams that are left, there's none of them that I actually want to see win the Stanley Cup. There's no underdog teams left. I'm certainly not going to root for the Canes being a division rival of the Rangers. I'm not going to root for the Panthers. I'm kind of sick of them at this point, especially after they knocked out the Rangers last year. The Oilers, I mean, whatever. I mean, if McDavid and Draisaitl get one, it's fine. I don't know. It's hard for me to really get on board with any of these teams. The Stars, I'm not the biggest Rantanen fan. I mean, you got to respect what he's doing in the playoffs because he's been unbelievable. Jamie Benn, kind of the same deal. Like, I can't really hate on him that much because you do appreciate the hard-nosed brand of hockey that guy plays, but I've just never really been a fan of him. I don't know. It's hard for me to pick out a team that I'd root for to win. I think I would root for either West team over either East team in the finals. Be curious to hear what you guys think about that as well. Honestly, I'm probably for the Oilers at this point, kind of just by process of elimination. I don't really have any good reason for it other than just that. I like them a little bit more than any of the other teams that are remaining. That's kind of where I'll put it. But as far as former Rangers go, I always find this interesting. There's no like former Ranger superstar that's still alive. There's no former Ranger left in this thing that you look at and say, oh my God, that guy needs to win a Stanley Cup. We got to pull for this guy. But there are players that I think were generally liked during their time with the Rangers, short though some of them might have been, their tenures with the Rangers. But we'll start with the Stars. You've got Colin Blackwell and Brendan Smith, both former New York Rangers. Blackwell had the Game 2 overtime winner in the first round against the Avalanche. That is one of the biggest goals the Stars have scored during this entire playoff run because that gave them the win. Obviously, he scored in overtime, but it also even the series at 1 game apiece heading to Colorado. Had he not scored that goal, it's entirely possible the Avalanche win that game in Game 2, and now the Avs are up 2-0 with Games 3 and 4 at home. It's not insurmountable if you're the Stars, but you're really starting to dig a hole. And as we found out, that series ended up going right down to the wire in Game 7. So an absolutely massive goal by Colin Blackwell. That is his only goal of the playoffs thus far. He only played in Game 3 of their series against the Jets. And so that means, as things stand right now, Blackwell has played in 7 of the Stars' 13 playoff games thus far. We'll see if he eventually works his way back into the lineup. Brendan Smith has not yet played in the playoffs, despite the Stars actually going with 7 defensemen in their most recent game, and despite dealing with a couple of injuries on the blue line as of right now. Smith, he was here for a while, and he kind of was something of a holdover from the closing championship window Rangers. They brought him in as a rental during their last year in the playoffs before they started rebuilding. And then they re-signed him, which I always thought was a little bit odd. But he was here for a while. He always seemed like a good teammate. We know that he fought Tom Wilson. I think we'll always certainly respect and appreciate him for that. He has not yet played in the playoffs, but if they win the Stanley Cup, I mean, his name goes on. I think he played in like 32 games for the Stars this year, which I assume his name goes on the cup for that. I never know the exact cutoff. If anybody knows that off the top of their head, leave it in the comments section. Like, because I don't know. Like, if you play in like 1 or 2 games, I don't think your name goes on the Stanley Cup, but I don't know what the exact cutoff is. So if anybody knows that off the top of their head, certainly feel free to let me know. I think Brendan Smith would certainly get his name on there. The Oilers, they don't have any former Rangers per se, but we'll give an honorable mention to Ty Emberson. The Rangers acquired Emberson, you might remember this, in the trade that sent Patrick Nemeth along with 2 second-rounders to the Coyotes. Nemeth was so bad in his 1 season with the Rangers that the Rangers had to bribe the Coyotes and bribe them heavily to take Emberson off of their hands. One of the assets that the Rangers got back in that trade, though, was Ty Emberson. Emberson ended up playing a full season with the Hartford Wolfpack, never saw action as a member of the New York Rangers. With the Wolfpack, for whatever this is worth, 69 games, he had 27 points. That was his lone season with Hartford. But Emerson has actually become, something of a regular with the Oilers. He's played in 9 of their 11 playoff games and become an important player for that team. We move on to the Carolina Hurricanes. We've got Jesper Fast and Jack Roslovic still alive. Fast is on LTIR, has not played in the playoffs. He did play in 73 regular season games. He's somebody that I feel like could really help a team in the playoffs. I mean, the Canes are doing just fine. They're 8-2 in the playoffs. But I will say, of all the former Rangers who are still alive, even though he won't be dressing for it, or certainly that's what it seems like, with him being injured and all, he's the one that I would root for most out of anybody to get his name on the Stanley Cup. And I don't think it's enough to make me really cheer for the Hurricanes, especially because he's not actually playing. But if the Canes win it all, that's my silver lining there. Jesper Fast, a hard-nosed player, a type of player that the Rangers could use more of going forward. A Jesper Fast-like player I think would be great for the Rangers. It'd be cool to see him as a Stanley Cup champion. And then you've got Roslovic. I mean, he has played in 7 of the Canes' 10 playoff games. He really cooled off with the Hurricanes after a hot start to the season. I feel like people still kind of use him as an example. Oh, man, look how good Roslovic has been for the Hurricanes. He's been okay. He ended up with 22 goals and 17 assists in 81 games, so less than a half point per game. I feel like people kind of just assume that he stayed on fire, and that's just not the case. He's got his role with the Canes for sure, but not playing like a superstar like he was at the start of the year. And then you've got the Panthers, and you've got Niko Mikkola. Again, just like Roslovic, he was only with the Rangers as a rental, half of a season. Mikkola won a Stanley Cup last year. I don't really care if he wins another one. He seems like a cool guy and everything, and he's become a good player for them and an important player for the Florida Panthers. But he won it all last year. He doesn't need another one. It's certainly not enough to get me to root for the Florida Panthers. And as I mentioned earlier, I think by default, I'm probably pulling for the Oilers. Check back with me after the puck drops. Because sometimes I think I'm going to root for this team in this series or that team in that series, and then the puck drops, and I just kind of see how it's going, and I like this player, and I don't like that player, and I kind of do a 180. But I think as of now, I would pull for the Oilers slightly, emphasis on slightly, to win the Stanley Cup at the end of the season, once it's all said and done here. But we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @JChik17. Once again, @JCHIK17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.